The young and the restless spoiler's Phyllis was never one to suffer quietly, and her decisive nature had always defined her actions. Over the years, she had made it clear to everyone that there were certain betrayals she would never forgive. Among those, Sharon's transgressions held a particularly poisonous weight. In Phyllis's eyes, Sharon had become a symbol of vulnerability and weakness, a woman unable to escape the shackles of her own past and the haunting specters that plagued her every waking moment. Sharon, trapped in the labyrinth of her troubled mind, was a prisoner to her own memories. Her psychological struggles had taken root so deeply that she found herself constantly tormented by terrifying hallucinations. In her fragile state, names like Cameron, Jordan, and Ian Ward were not just familiar, they were the personifications of her deepest fears. Each name triggered a cascade of anxiety and dread, leaving Sharon paralyzed with terror. Her existence was a daily battle, an endless cycle of fear and despair that left her gasping for relief, while the lines between reality and illusion blurred into an inescapable nightmare. In stark contrast to Sharon's suffering, the environment around her seemed to be filled with both hope and treachery. Nick, a man of strong principles and unwavering loyalty, had always been at the heart of her support system. His commitment to protecting and caring for Sharon was evident to all who observed their interactions. Nick's genuine affection and relentless dedication were a beacon of light in the midst of Sharon's turbulent life. Friends and family alike could see how every effort he made was driven by love and an almost sacred duty to safeguard her well-being. However, amidst this delicate balance of care and conflict, the specter of envy loomed large over Phyllis. The sight of Nick and the others showering Sharon with love stirred something dark and twisted inside her. For Phyllis, witnessing the compassion and community that Sharon received was not a sign of progress or redemption, rather, it was a bitter reminder of what she felt she deserved and was inexplicably denied. Her heart, long hardened by her own past disappointments, could not bear the thought of Sharon being cherished by those she believed had once wronged her. The cold tragedy that deepened this festering animosity was the lonely, silent death of Heather, a woman who had once been caught in the crossfire of their turbulent lives. Heather's demise, marked by an eerie stillness and a lack of the warmth that had once characterized her existence, only served to intensify Phyllis's bitter resolve. The lifeless form of Heather, lying in solitude, symbolized the end of what might have been a chance at redemption for a fragile soul. It was as if Heather's untimely death had cemented Phyllis's belief that forgiveness was a luxury she could ill afford, and that extreme measures were the only language through which justice, or retribution, could be spoken. Fueled by an all-consuming rage and the belief that Sharon was a continuous source of betrayal and weakness, Phyllis had meticulously devised a plan so dangerous and ruthless that it sent ripples of fear throughout the undercurrents of their intertwined lives. Her resolve crystallized into a single, chilling objective: to end Sharon's life once and for all. In the silent hours of the night, when darkness cloaked the world in secrecy, Phyllis began to execute her plan with a cold precision that belied the depth of her inner turmoil. On one fateful night, as the moon hung high in the sky, casting long, eerie shadows on the ground, Phyllis made her move. The target was clear: Sharon's house, a place that had become a sanctuary of hope for the brokenhearted. Unbeknownst to her, however, Nick had grown increasingly suspicious. His instincts, honed by years of safeguarding those he loved, had detected something amiss. When Nick discovered traces of a forced entry at Sharon's residence, his heart pounded with a mix of dread and determination. Every fiber of his being screamed that something terrible was unfolding, a scene straight out of a nightmare that he had vowed never to let become reality. In the dead of night, while the world slept, Nick witnessed a figure sneaking into the very heart of Sharon's refuge. His pulse quickened as he recognized the unmistakable form of Phyllis, stealthily moving through the shadows with an intent that could only be described as lethal. With each careful step she took, the weight of her mission pressed down on her like an anchor, her eyes devoid of mercy. There was no hesitation in her actions, only a cold, calculated resolve that promised only one outcome: Sharon's demise. Without a moment's pause, Nick sprang into action. With the speed and precision of someone who had trained for emergencies, he intercepted Phyllis just as she was about to carry out her deadly purpose. A fierce struggle ensued, a chaotic clash of wills where every second was a battle for life itself. In a desperate bid to protect Sharon and uphold his duty, Nick fought with a ferocity that left no room for doubt. He managed to overpower Phyllis, delivering a crushing blow that sent her sprawling to the ground, unconscious and defeated. The silence that followed was heavy with a sense of foreboding. Phyllis lay motionless on the cold floor, her ambitions of retribution extinguished by the very person she had sought to betray. The immediacy of the threat had been thwarted, but the consequences of that fateful night would ripple through their lives for a long time to come. For Sharon, the shock was overwhelming. The realization that someone she had once known, a person she might have once trusted, had attempted to end her life was a betrayal too deep to fathom. The sudden intrusion of violence shattered the fragile illusion of safety that she had clung to, leaving her reeling in a state of disbelief and despair. In the aftermath of the harrowing event, as dawn began to break and the first rays of sunlight crept through the curtains, the emotional landscape of everyone involved had changed irrevocably. Nick, now more determined than ever, took it upon himself to ensure that Sharon would never again be left vulnerable to such a sinister force. His protective instincts, now coupled with a burning desire for justice, fueled every action he took in the days that followed. To him, Sharon was not merely a person in need of care, she was the embodiment of hope in a world that had become all too cruel. As word of the attempted murder spread, the once hidden fractures within their community were laid bare. Each person was forced to confront the dark undercurrents of betrayal, envy, and the consequences of unchecked ambition. The lines between friend and foe blurred, and the delicate balance of trust was irrevocably shattered. For Phyllis, the repercussions of her actions would be far-reaching. Her descent into darkness, spurred by jealousy and a refusal to forgive, had led her down a path of irreversible ruin. The irreversible consequences of that night were a testament to the fact that sometimes, the demons we harbor within can manifest in the most destructive ways. In this turbulent tapestry of intertwined lives, where love, hate, and sorrow coexisted in a precarious equilibrium, each character was forced to reckon with their own inner demons. Sharon, now more haunted than ever, had to find a way to rebuild her shattered sense of self. Nick, burdened by the weight of responsibility and the scars of witnessing such violence, had to continue his fight, not only against external threats but also against the creeping darkness that threatened to engulf him. And Phyllis, lying unconscious and defeated, became a stark symbol of how a heart consumed by bitterness and unresolved grievances can lead to catastrophic consequences. Ultimately, the harrowing events of that night served as a grim reminder that forgiveness is a fragile, often elusive virtue in a world where past wounds fester and feed the fires of vengeance. It highlighted the perilous paths that individuals tread when driven by unrelenting emotions, where the quest for retribution overshadows any possibility of redemption. And for those left behind, like Nick and Sharon, the journey forward was one fraught with uncertainty, where every shadow could hide a new threat, and every moment of calm was a fleeting illusion. The story of that fateful night became more than just an isolated incident, it was a turning point in the lives of everyone involved. It was a moment that exposed the raw, unfiltered realities of human nature, a reminder that even in the midst of love and care, betrayal and enmity could lurk, waiting for the opportune moment to strike. As the days turned into weeks and the echoes of that night continued to reverberate through their hearts, each character was forced to confront the harsh truth that sometimes, the battle for one's soul is waged not only against external adversaries but also within the recesses of one's own tortured mind. In the end, while Nick's courageous act had prevented an immediate tragedy, the deeper wounds inflicted by that night would take much longer to heal. The lives of Sharon, Nick, and even Phyllis, though she now lay in a state of involuntary slumber, were forever changed, their destinies intertwined in a dance of light and shadow, hope and despair. And as they each moved forward into an uncertain future, the lessons of that night would serve as a somber reminder of the thin line between love and hate, and the high cost of letting bitterness go unchallenged. This narrative not only captures the dramatic unfolding of events but also delves into the complex emotional and psychological landscapes of the characters involved, highlighting the enduring struggle between forgiveness and vengeance, and the ultimate price of unresolved animosities. A dark legacy, the unforgivable betrayal. Daniel never expected Phyllis to go that far. Yet, deep down, he knew that if she hadn't acted, he might have been the one to take justice into his own hands. The unbearable truth was that they could never truly move on from Heather's death. Her loss had left an open wound that would never heal. The pain was all-consuming, a fire that refused to die out. And the ones responsible? Sharon, her family, and all those who blindly protected them. Heather's death was a tragedy, but the world had treated it like an afterthought. No one cared enough to offer condolences to Daniel or Lucy, no one stood by them in their grief. Not a single person reached out with an apology, a word of comfort, or even the smallest acknowledgement of the pain they were enduring. Instead, all they received were whispers, accusations, and cold indifference. Instead of sympathy, Daniel found himself on trial in the court of public opinion. People claimed he was exaggerating, twisting facts, making up lies just to vilify Sharon. They were so desperate to paint her as innocent, as the perpetual victim, that they refused to see the truth. It was easier to call him a liar than to accept the possibility that their fragile, broken Sharon was capable of destruction. Sharon was no murderer, they said. It was the final insult, the ultimate betrayal. Daniel's rage became an unstoppable force, fueled by the injustice of it all. The idea that Sharon could simply move on, that her family could continue living their lives as if nothing had happened, it was unthinkable. And at the center of it all was Nick, her ever-loyal protector, the man who shielded her from every consequence, regardless of right or wrong. Nick didn't care about the truth. Nick didn't care about Heather. Nick didn't care about the devastation left in the wake of his actions. All he cared about was Sharon. And for that, he deserved to die. A mind poisoned by loss. The more Daniel thought about it, the clearer his purpose became. His mother had failed. She had tried to take Sharon's life, but Nick had interfered. He had ruined everything, just like he always did. And yet, even after seeing Phyllis for what she had done, Daniel could not bring himself to condemn her. She had only done what needed to be done. The problem was, she hadn't succeeded. And if she couldn't finish the job, then it was up to him. He had lost Heather. Lucy had lost her mother. Why should Sharon get to keep her life, her children, her sense of security? Why should Nick get to walk away unscathed after choosing her over justice? The grief that consumed Daniel was turning into something far darker. The thought of Nick's unwavering devotion to Sharon made his blood boil. The way Nick had rushed to her defense, the way he had been willing to fight, to kill, just to save her, was disgusting. What kind of man protects a murderer while stepping over the corpse of an innocent woman? Nick had made his choice, and now, Daniel would make his. If Nick wanted to die for Sharon, then so be it. A plan set in motion. Daniel had never thought of himself as a killer before. Revenge was something he had always associated with people like Phyllis, hot-tempered, impulsive, unable to let things go. He had always prided himself on being different. But grief had a way of warping a man's mind, of stripping away the boundaries that once defined right and wrong. Heather was gone. Lucy was suffering. And yet, the world kept spinning as if nothing had changed. That alone was enough to break him. He had never been violent before. But there was a first time for everything. He watched Nick from afar, studying him the way a predator studies its prey. He observed his patterns, learned his weaknesses. Nick was strong, but strength could be deceiving. A man who thought himself invincible rarely saw the knife until it was already in his back. Daniel wasn't reckless. He wasn't like Phyllis, acting in the heat of the moment without thinking about the consequences. He would do this the right way. No mistakes. No loose ends. And when the moment came, Nick wouldn't even see it coming. The point of no return, but fate, as always, had a way of twisting things in the cruelest of ways. Daniel's moment came sooner than expected. He had been planning, waiting for the perfect opportunity, but something inside him snapped when he saw Nick standing outside Sharon's house that night. The sight of him, looking so normal, so at peace, as if nothing had ever happened, was too much to bear. Before he knew it, Daniel was moving, his feet carrying him forward before his mind could catch up. Nick turned, sensing the presence behind him, and the moment their eyes met, Daniel knew there was no going back. "Daniel?" Nick's voice held a mixture of surprise and caution. He could see something in Daniel's expression, something dark, something dangerous. "What are you doing here?" Daniel said nothing. He only stared, his body tense with barely contained fury. "You shouldn't be here," Nick continued, his voice softer now, almost sympathetic. "I know you're hurting. I know losing Heather was—" "Don't," Daniel snapped, his voice shaking. "Don't say her name. You don't have the right." Nick exhaled slowly, clearly trying to de-escalate the situation. "I'm sorry. I should have done more. You should have let Phyllis kill her." Nick froze. "Because if she had done it," Daniel continued, stepping closer, "I wouldn't have to be here right now. I wouldn't have to do what you forced me to do." Realization dawned in Nick's eyes, but before he could react, Daniel lunged. It wasn't a clean attack. It wasn't calculated. It was raw, desperate, fueled by pain and fury. They crashed to the ground in a violent struggle, fists flying, rage boiling over in a clash of grief and guilt. Daniel had the upper hand, at least, for a moment. But Nick was stronger. More experienced. And when he finally managed to shove Daniel back, pinning him to the ground, he didn't hesitate. "Enough." Nick's voice was strained, breathless. His hands clenched into fists, but he didn't strike. He didn't need to. Daniel was already defeated. "You don't get it," Daniel choked out, his voice breaking. "She deserved it. You don't care about anyone but her. You let Heather die, and you don't even care." Nick's jaw tightened, his eyes dark with something unreadable. "I do care," he said finally. "But this isn't the way." Daniel let out a bitter laugh, hollow and broken. "Then tell me, Nick, what is?" The silence stretched between them, heavy and suffocating. Nick didn't have an answer. Because deep down, they both knew there wasn't one. And as Daniel lay there, staring up at the man he had once considered a friend, he realized the terrible truth: Heather was gone. Sharon was still alive. And nothing would ever change that.